Jillian Johnsrud, welcome to the Lean Out podcast. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. Doing great.
Good. It's great to see you again. We've known each other for a
Mhm.
little while.
Yeah, a couple of
Well,
years.
yeah, for people who don't know you, why don't
Mhm.
you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about how your work life balance is different from other people who do what you do.
Mm. So, my husband at the time and I started pursuing financial independence. And I wouldn't even say we called it that at the time, but we're trying to be good with our money when I was 19. And throughout our 20s, like we paid down debt and invested in real estate. And I became financially independent when I was 32. And so I think my work is definitely different in that I started it as a creative outlet. I started it as a way to add value to my life and kind of give me a sense of meaning and purpose. So I've optimized my work and my business for those things. So I think it makes it look very different than other people who are, obviously optimizing their business for profitability, which is awesome. Like people need to be profitable, but that was never my driving motivation. So as a consequence, my work does look pretty different than that of my peers.
And for anyone who is listening that is like, what is she talking about when she says financial independence? Because the term has definitely been said on this podcast before. I've talked about.
Yeah.
But can you describe what that means?
Yeah, for us, that was our investments, our passive income was enough to cover all of our living expenses indefinitely. So while working and earning money are fun and awesome things, they weren't necessary to like pay the mortgage or to buy food. Like all of the basics were covered. And so those pursuits, yeah, we were able to kind of optimize for other things.
Yeah. And I think the beauty of that is that financial independence looks different for everyone. It really
Mhm.
depends on what your values are, what your interests are, what kind of money you spend, like on a regular
Mhm.
basis. So, what kind of things are you doing for your business now? I know you have a coaching arm, and we're going to talk
Mhm.
about your new book. Tell us everything that you're involved in.
Yeah. So let's see. I on the kind of content free-ish side, I do have a book coming out, which technically is a paid thing, but as an author, that's basically free.
Yes.
That's community service. The amount of work that goes into writing a book. Um, and I have a newsletter that's a little unhinged. I send one or two of those a month. I have the Retire Often podcast that I share other people's mini retirement stories on. And then behind the scenes, I do one on one coaching. I do group coaching for people who are about to take a mini retirement. And I do a little bit of public speaking, but I really have tried to optimize my business for simplicity. I think there's lots of different ways you can make money online, and that's fun and that's exciting. And for me, I found when I've dabbled in those, it's only added complexity and stress to my life in a way that the money didn't feel like a good trade-off. So I really try to focus on doing the things that I love doing the most. And honestly, any of the other tasks, if they're not the thing I'm most passionate about, I either pay someone else to do it, if it really needs to get done, or I try to design my business in a way that I don't have to do it. So there's a lot of things I technically maybe should be doing, and I'm like, "Yeah," or I'm just not going to because I don't want to.
This is so familiar. And anyone who has listened to my podcast before will know that I talk about this a lot for myself. So I definitely resonate with what you're saying because I am not willing to do certain things that maybe I should be doing as a conscientious business owner. But when you're in a place where you're doing your business as a creative outlet and as something that brings you joy and fulfillment, it's different, like you said. So your objectives are different. And I think that's beautiful. And I'll link back to an episode that I did that was a solo episode on this podcast that was about being an anti hustle entrepreneur, as
Mm,
you could say.
yep.
So your new book is called Retire Often. So this book is all about mini retirements, and some people at times call these sabbaticals. We've had a
Yeah.
couple of episodes on our show about people taking something of that nature. So tell us what the elements are of a mini retirement.
Yeah, there's a lot of names for it, and whatever one resonates with you, like sabbatical's popular, career break, hiatus, gap year, like whichever one you're like, for this one, this feels like it fits the bill. But I have kind of three elements that characteristics that I feel like define a mini retirement. The first one is that it's a month or longer. I've noticed that a month is kind of the minimum effective dose. So some people it's 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. It can be however long you want it to be, but at least a month is a good starting spot. The second one, stepping away from your primary career. So some people do for a lot of people, it's like a wonderful vacation or an epic adventure or pursuing other goals. But some people do use it for volunteering or testing out a different profession or doing something adjacent, but not really their job. Um, Things that they wanted to do but just didn't have time to do alongside of their career. So number two, stepping away from your career. And number three, to focus on something that matters to you, something that's meaningful. When you get those three things together, it can be kind of magical.
Yeah, I love it. And I have done this kind of thing in medicine, but I know
Mm.
that a lot of people listening are physicians and other professionals, and they're going to be like, well,
Yeah.
how does this fit into a professional career? What is
Mhm.
your experience with that?
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of medical professionals because I think burnout's everywhere, but it seems even more intense in the medical profession. So, for people in medical professions, I think there can be, we all have concerns of why this won't work for us. But in general, there's three ways you can take a mini retirement. And the first one is in between jobs. And I think in medicine, there are a few natural transition points that you could intentionally be like, okay, I'm finishing this thing, finishing residency or whatever that is. And I'm going to take a month, I'm going to take 3 months, or I'm going to take 6 months and kind of regroup. Or just between careers. I had one client that, lived in the western part of the US and was going to move to the eastern part and had to switch jobs and took a year off in between. There is a tendency, like in a lot of jobs, but if you're kind of in it, you might work 5 years, 10 years consecutively. And so then it makes sense instead of doing a month-long mini retirement, if you're going to do 10 years with one employer, why not take 6 months or a year off in between if it's hard to take those smaller breaks? So in between jobs can be useful and just thinking through that, planning for that, being ready for that. Or you can negotiate time off, which I know there can be like a lot of resistance and hesitation because there's all of these questions. But I have found, especially in medical professions, the demand for high quality workers is so high that they're pretty employable. Like, they usually don't have a hard time finding the next gig, and because it's so hard to find really good workers, they usually have more leverage in negotiating that time off because the employer doesn't want to replace them. And so it kind of becomes on you, how do you position this so that you taking time off is the easiest, cheapest, simplest solution versus replacing you?
Yeah, definitely. It's very well known that it takes a lot of money, credentialing,
Mhm.
staff, and resources to hire a new physician.
Yeah.
And so if you just quit, that can be very difficult for a practice. The other thing is that traditionally in medicine and law and some other professions, people didn't move, and even
Yeah.
just kind of like corporate jobs. But now
Mhm.
it's part of the landscape that people will switch around to different careers. So being intentional about building in a little bit of time for yourself in between, I think is a really great idea. The other one I wanted to point out, which I think is different for Definitely medical professionals, maybe not legal professionals and some other like in finance or tech, but the standard American vacation, as you know, is like 2 to 3 weeks, maybe. But for medical professionals, it's usually longer than that. There are
Mhm.
definitely some employed physicians in like big systems like Kaiser or something like that where they have like a shorter vacation. But for a private practice, they have sometimes a long period of time off. Like in anesthesia, I know a lot of groups, the standard would be like more than 8 weeks off. And so I like to try to convince people to take maybe like one of their times that they're taking a vacation as opposed to taking it like a traditional vacation where you're just thinking of like a week. Take a month. Take like half of your vacation at one time. And you could call it a mini retirement or you can call it a sabbatical or whatever if you want. But in some people, my point is that it's already legitimately built into their life and they just don't
Yeah.
take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, have you had any clients or come across the issue of credentialing and procedural based skills? People who have a job where they can't take a certain amount of time off because they're not really allowed to for their credentialing. Like, this is a
Mhm.
problem with procedure based specialties in medicine, like surgery or anesthesia. What do you tell those
Yeah.
people?
Yeah, it's important to know what the parameters are. And it can be easy to say, well, I can't do 2 years off and travel overseas. So then I guess I can't do anything. But know what those limits are and know what are the ways that maybe I could push those limits. Like, okay, if it's cool if I take 6 months off, but maybe that means that I would need to travel and then maybe I need to come back to the States and do like a 3-month stint and go to this conference and do this. But then I could take another 6 months off. And one of the ways, if you really are having a hard time imagining this, is finding other people who have been the outliers. Finding the other people who figured it out and just being like, "Hey, so how did you do this?" Because there's not one way it can look. There can be a lot of different ways, and in the book I go through part of this in this negotiation and thinking through this are what are like the concessions you're willing to make? Almost like the compromises that you're willing to make. So, for example, I had a client that wanted to take the summer off. She was an accountant, um, and they could hire a temp and they could cover her, except the employer really didn't feel comfortable with someone else doing the end of the month books because
Mm.
that was really important. Well, based on her schedule and what she had planned for the summer, for her to come in for a day at the end of the month, 6 hours and finish those end of month books, it wasn't a huge concession. And she was like, "Yeah, if I get 3 months off, I can go in for 6 hours, 3 days, like, and that's cool." So, figuring out, okay, I might need to make these little concessions, but if I'm still getting 80% of the benefit, 90% of the benefit, that's a net positive. That's a win. And sometimes those concessions, whether it's, um, yeah, a little bit of work, a little bit of education, showing up for things, they don't feel awful if you rested, if you've been gone for a while, if you've been traveling, if you had an 8-week trip through Europe and now you're coming back to kind of plug in for a few days or a weeks, it might kind of feel nice, especially if you get to go unplug after that.
You're absolutely right, and there are a couple of things that I want to point out in your response, which is that it's not all or nothing. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people will just cursily look at the rules and
Yeah.
be like, "All right, well, nah, I can't do it." They just find a reason to make it so that it's not possible. However, if you look at the fine print, like for instance, for anesthesia, because I have done something like a sabbatical before. As you know, we have talked about this and I have been on your podcast talking about it. Um, with anesthesia, to have an active board status, it says that you need to have worked something like a quarter of the time, basically, but it's averaged over a period of 2 years.
Yeah.
So you're worried about this. Well, I'm not going to be working a quarter of the time, so I'm going to lose my board status. Well, you can like go back and then work a little extra and it'll average out and it's fine. And I mean, what are the chances that someone's actually going to really scrutinize that anyway? Pretty low. but you can make sure for your own peace of mind that you're coming out with the right numbers if you need
Yeah.
to. And then about the concessions, a good example of that in medicine is that I was working in an academic practice when I negotiated a sabbatical. And the academic practice is super busy in the summer. Like it's
Mhm.
always, when all the new residents are in and they're training people and the new trainees are coming in and have to be one-on-one with faculty members. And so everybody has to be in the OR. Basically, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to go away for that time, or at least it would be more attracted to my department if I said, hey, I'll definitely be there for these months because I know this is your busiest time. And of course, that's the way that I said it too. I was like, because this is so busy, this is what I propose. I propose that I will be gone once the dust settles in September, and I will be back at the end of May.
Yeah.
And it worked. So that's a good example of a concession. And it can look like anything, like you said, like maybe coming back for one day a month to do a particular thing that only you can do, or
Mhm.
that it would be really
Absolutely.
hard to train somebody else on.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we assume it's not as flexible as it is, like you said, with a quarter time. Like there's a lot of flexibility in that. But if you're like, no, I have to in a 6-month period, I have to be working 5 months or else like I'm kicked out of medicine. Like whatever you think that really strict rule is, I would consider what if you did kind of a professional pivot? Sometimes for people in one context, in one situation, work feels a different way, which is number 2, like you're stepping away from your primary, but it doesn't mean you need to step out of something entirely. What if you were in a different part of the country? What if you were like, I normally do medicine in this area, in this kind of environment, but I'm going to go to the reservations in South Dakota and I'm going to volunteer with this team and do this kind of work. And maybe instead of 60 hours, you're doing 20 hours a week, but you're in a whole new place and it's a whole new vibe and you're practicing in a different way. Or maybe you can work in overseas environments or other places that feel exciting and energizing and just different. It feels different than your 9 to 5. It feels different than your day to day. And that can be really refreshing, but it can also be professionally advantageous. I think there's a misconception that mini retirements derail our career, but there's a lot of ways we can use mini retirements to elevate our career trajectory and to really invest in our career.
Yeah. Now I know that you talked about people using it as a way that they can actually command a higher salary eventually.
Mhm.
So, talk about some of the other benefits you've seen in your experience in people taking mini retirements.
Yeah, I think there's an assumption that, of course, it'll be good for my personal life. Like I'll recover from burnout, time with people I love, maybe travel, hobbies, health, all that good stuff. But financially and professionally, there can be a lot of advantages. One of them is that for most people, switching jobs, switching employers is your best chance at getting a significant raise to get something over that 5 or 10%, because a lot of people won't switch jobs for like a 3% raise. Like it has to be a little bit more substantial. So that can massively improve your lifetime earning potential. If you're strategic of, you know what, I want to stay in places maybe 3 to 5 years, but I might not give a company 20 years. I'm going to plan these mini retirements and I'm going to find kind of the next best thing. And there's a few things that kind of play into that, in that when we remove ourselves from the workforce, there seems to be, I don't know how to say it, like a little bit of a discontent with us not being there for everyone who thinks we should be working.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so
Yeah.
sometimes there's a lot more. Have you considered this job? This job's opening. Like, would you consider coming here? People that will try to recruit you that when you were happily employed would never recruit you.
Mhm.
It's like suddenly being Signal, and all of a sudden, like there's more interest because you're available now. Um, and so that can be really advantageous. But I think also in medicine, it's particularly important or useful if you've made some financial progress, if you are moving along on your financial goals and getting kind of further on that spectrum, what I call like a second chapter career. The first chapter being we're just optimizing for kind of profitability. Like, we want to pay down our debt, we want to start investing. Like, we really have to optimize for our income. And then you kind of reach a tipping point where maybe income isn't the only thing you want to optimize for. Maybe your health, maybe your relationships, maybe your family, those start becoming bigger priorities than just earning the absolute most amount of money. And a lot of people in medicine, if they step away for a while and kind of like recover from burnout and reimagine, there's other ways that they can practice medicine that maybe isn't as taxing on them, even if it's a slight pay decrease. I had one client that was in kind of traditional medicine and then moved into still medicine, but a slightly different kind of medicine, where she has like 2 months off in the summer and like a couple weeks over Christmas. Like, she gets all the school holidays. Like, it's a much more lifestyle, useful career. And it was like maybe a small decrease in pay. I'm trying to think through the numbers, but a massive boost to their lifestyle and to her well-being. And so a mini retirement can be great for that. Like, okay, I've made some progress. We're in a good spot now. But do I want maybe my career to look different for the next 20 years? By switching and taking time off, it might extend your working career 5 or 10 years and financially be massively advantageous on the back end.
Yes, I totally agree with this. I see people all the time just through coaching consultations, clients,
Mhm.
and also online in the Facebook groups I'm in, where they're talking about switching completely to non-clinical work.
Mhm.
And definitely the lifestyle can be better, depending on what you like for your lifestyle. And the pay isn't going to necessarily be as high, especially if you're
Right.
like a surgeon or something like that, where you command a high pay, and then you go down to one of these non-clinical jobs. If there's a way that you can sustainably stay in your specialty and just do it in a different capacity, a slightly different kind of job. Maybe you do locums. Maybe you get some sort of a fill-in job. You have a job share. You find a position that, like you're saying, that has a much better lifestyle. You're still going to come out financially better in the end. And so I'm all for people staying in their profession in some way that's sustainable to
Yeah.
them and not taking this complete 180-degree pivot just because they think it's going to solve all their problems.
Yes. And it can be easy to look at the upfront cost and kind of bulk at it, but you have to think long term. I was talking to a dentist once, and I think it's tough when you run a private practice, when
Mm.
you're like the person does all the things. There's no employer to like negotiate this with. Uh, and I was like, but you could pay someone to come in and cover you for a month or 3 months. And he was like, oh my gosh, that's so expensive. And I'm like, yeah, it's expensive. But it also might mean if you do this frequently, you might be able to work an extra year, an extra 5 years on the back end because you're not so burned out, because you're not so like crispy. Another 5 years of your money compounding is going to be so much more than that expensive 3 months that you did. I mean, even for private practice, if you did that every 5 years, every 6 years, it could be massively beneficial to your quality of life and your happiness, but also your career sustainability.
Yes, absolutely. I was just thinking about that term, and I love that. Now, the one thing that I also hear, because I have a coaching client right now who talks about wanting to take a longer period of time off, but feeling just overwhelmed at the planning aspect of it.
Mhm.
So I know in your book, you talk a lot about that. You have like a whole section about
Mhm.
planning your mini retirement. So, what is your advice for how to structure? If you decide that you're going to do this, you negotiate, you use the skills to
Yeah.
negotiate, you also outline. Then, what do you do to figure out how to not just waste it basically and have some sort of a structure that helps to keep you accountable to doing the things that you wanted to do?
Yeah, this is so important. It's one of those things, a mini retirement it's so much hassle. It's logistical hassle to plan, and it's expensive, and like it's all the things. definitely put a couple hours into making sure it goes well because it's too big of a thing to be like, I'll wing it. I think there is a misconception of if I'm not working, it'll be amazing. That's all I need. All I need is not to be working and I'll be so happy. But happiness is one part reducing suffering and one part adding joy. Reducing suffering will be awesome. For the first like week or two, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I love my life so much. It's not that ready to go into work. And then eventually you'll need to work on that adding joy. So definitely thinking through it. And the first thing I encourage people to do is to pick the intention. What's the biggest goal? And you can pick, I because people can't pick one thing. It's impossibly difficult. So up to 3 things is my concession on that. Up to 3 things. Uh, but the danger, if you're really burned out, if you're so behind on life, if you're behind on seeing your parents, if you're behind on travel, if you're behind on organizing your house, if you're behind on your workout schedule, is to be like, okay, so there's 86 things I'm going to accomplish during my time off because all of these are equally important. But the trouble is when we disperse our energy across 86 things, we don't really make progress on any of them. And it can actually feel very disconcerting. It can feel very uncomfortable because it doesn't feel like any of them are going very well. So start by picking 1, 2, 3 things, specific things, whether you're recovering from burnout, investing in your health, spending time with your kids, traveling, whatever that thing is. And then the second step, if you have 3 things, is do one at a time. Make distinct, discrete phases of this. If you have 3 months off, maybe each one gets a month. 1 month of just recovering from burnout, 1 month of just travel, 1 month of just time with your kids, because it can be, even when you only have 3 things, it can be a little untethering, to be like, "Wait, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Like, should we be going out and traveling, or should I be taking a nap? Am I allowed to take a nap, or should I be, like, playing a board game with my kids?" And it can be hard to give ourselves permission to do the thing we should be doing. But if you're in month 1 and it's recover from burnout, you're like, "Yep, nap it is." Like, don't need to be doing anything else. And I see it help people really settle in and feel really comfortable with how they are spending their time.
I didn't really ask you in the beginning of this why you personally decided to focus on this because you really started your career as a financial independence expert, coach, inspiring person who created content in that realm. How did it morph into mini retirements?
Well, when um my spouse at the time and I started our financial journey, we weren't in high income professions. So I never assumed we would be able to retire early. Like that seemed like a farce, like just logistically impossible. So we started with the intention of taking mini retirements because I thought that was something that was accessible. And we had these big goals and these dreams. And I thought, okay, maybe we can retire when we're 60. That was my first like super ambitious goal was 60. So mini retirements were kind of the plan. And early retirement was the surprise. Um,
Mm.
so we had taken a number of mini retirements on the path to financial independence. So when I started writing, that was a big part of my story, and it was very different than the path that most people in the FI community had taken at that time, where they had pushed really hard for 10 or 15 years, relentlessly to hit FI. I was like, oh, I kind of like, I didn't do that. I wasn't even thinking that way. So when I started writing, it was really infused with that's one option is just to push really hard. Or here's what I did, and here's why it was really beneficial, and here's why it was really helpful for me. And so, it's been almost 10 years now that I've been writing and doing creative work online. And I think FI has morphed and pivoted a little bit because there's been a couple voices that are like, there's actually another option. There's another way this journey can look. Then I saw a bunch of people in the FI community hit FI and retire. And oh, it was
And
rough.
go back to work.
Go back to work.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit, and it's sad, but slightly amusing to me. In that I'll talk to people who are on this, like, I'm just gonna push really hard for 5 more years, then I'm gonna hit 5, and then I'm gonna retire forever. And it's a little bit like if someone says, "Man, I'm really excited. I'm gonna run a marathon. 5 years, I'm gonna run this marathon. It's gonna be awesome." And you're like, "Oh, that's so cool. Do you do like 5K races?" And they're like, "No, no, no. No, because that would mean that I might run the marathon later. So I'm just gonna sit at my desk for 60 hours a week. But I've been listening to podcasts about running marathon. I've read a couple books. Like, I'm gonna be awesome at it." And you're like, "You don't you don't wanna practice at all? Like, a little bit? Just test out this running thing?" They're like, "No, no practice necessary. It's gonna be amazing. I'm just gonna, like, head down focus, sitting at my desk for, like, 5 more years, and then I'm off to the marathon." And then shockingly, it doesn't go great because as as humans, we typically aren't good at things we've never done before. If we've never practiced them, if we've never experienced them, usually that first go isn't brilliant. And so many retirements were really a way of like, why don't you practice? Practice for a month, practice for 6 months, like work out some of the kinks, get through the learning curve, deal with the emotional stuff, deal with the psychological stuff, deal with the logistics of it. Because every time you do it, you get better at it. And then when you get to early retirement, it's just going to be an easy transition, a smooth transition because you've practiced this a whole bunch.
Yeah, and try on a different identity and
Yes.
see what feels and get comfortable with the idea that your identity is gonna change because it definitely will at some point.
It's really important that you practice this because there is a little bit of a learning curve. And if you feel daunted of like, what do I tell people? How do I find a sense of purpose? Because you're taking 6 months off or a year, taking 30 years is not easier than 1 year.
Yeah.
It is 30 times as hard. So, like, yeah, start to figure some of this stuff out in these short time periods where you can just say, I'm just on a break, but I'm going back. Like, I'm gonna do important work again really soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me what your favorite mini retirement experience has been, if you can choose a favorite.
So I've done 12 at this point, and I love mini retirements in that they're kind of like a Swiss Army knife. They have so many different functions, and they were all so important for their own reason. Um, I took a month off in my 20s to do outpatient therapy, like 6 hours a day, which is crazy intense for a month. Like, it was like a full house renovation on my internal world.
Yeah.
So not, like, super fun by any means, it was exhausting, but I can look at my 20s and I delineate my 20s as before that month and after that month.
Mm.
Not that it finished the work, but it set me on a different trajectory for my personal growth that I have benefited from every single year since. I'm so much of a different person now because I took that 1 month and did that hard thing, and so it's like, well, that wasn't super fun, but man, was that impactful. There's ones that, me and my ex took to buy rental properties, maybe not the most fun, but massively increased our net worth because of it. So those were super helpful financially. Probably the one that was maybe the most fun, I did a 10-week trip with my kids to 10 national parks in a pop-up camper. This would have been like 7 or 8 years ago, and they were all like itsy bitsy. And I look through those pictures like once a month, and they're like 1 and 3 and 6 years old, and now they're all like teenagers and junior kids. They're all like gigantic and awkward and, with their own fun, quirky human beings. But it was so special to have all of those memories with them and all of those experiences. And I had this sense of this is a season with an expiration date. This isn't gonna last forever. Like,
Yeah.
this is a moment in time, and if I tried to wait 10 years or 20 years, I I can't do it. It's over. The whole season has passed me by. This is our one chance to do this special, unique thing.
If there's ever uh, an ending message, I think that's it. Don't wait. You're never gonna get the time back that you have
No.
right now, and make the most of it. So, thank you so much for telling us about this eye opening area of career sustainability, something that can really help you to have longevity and improved overall work life balance. Can you tell people a little bit more about where to find you, when the book drops? Because it should be coming out pretty soon, and where they can get it.
Yeah, it's available for pre-order, so, order it right away, and then it'll be a fun surprise on September 9th. It will show up.
Right.
But retireoften.com, you can find my podcast, my coaching, the book, everything. On social media, I'm at Jillian Johnsrud.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been so fun to talk with you.
Thank you so much.